convinced that you have heard about the tragic fate that Cholo faced in his final hours after betraying Sayan. But what about Chapo's scion? What actions triggered such a brutal murder in broad daylight at the most crucial moment of his final hours? The Sinaloa Cartel is widely recognized as the most extensive and powerful drug trafficking organization in the world. It has an extensive network of operations that spans the entire globe and is responsible for smuggling billions of dollars in drugs annually. An empire of such magnitude and power, in fact, requires an heir to perpetuate its legacy, and El Chapo chose his firstborn and favorite as his successor. Guzman Lopez, born on May 30th, 1986, since he opened his eyes, Edgar found himself surrounded by power, influence, and danger lurking around every corner. As the firstborn of El Chapo and his first wife, Griselda Lopez Perez, Edgar was groomed to become involved in his father's criminal activities from an early age. He grew up on a ranch in the Mexican city of Jesus Maria, where he was trained with a group of young hitmen under the tutelage of his father. Even in his teens, he was rumored to be overseeing some Sinaloa Cartel drug operations, despite being the heir to a ruthless empire. Edgar was known for his humility and serenity. Additionally, he was ambitious and completed his early education at a government school, pursuing a degree in business administration. Edgar was part of a new generation of drug traffickers known in Mexico as narco juniors. These narco successors have existed in Mexico almost as long as the business itself, but since the 1970s, the sons and daughters of the kingpins have followed a different path. Rather than immediately emulate their predecessors, they have increasingly chosen to attend top schools, sometimes even abroad, to learn more about the business. All of these qualities, along with his father's trust, led to Edgar being designated as the next leader of the Sinaloa Cartel. However, fate had other plans for him, as his life was tragically cut short before he reached the age of 22. The prince died on May 8, 2008, just when Mother's Day was around the corner, and Edgar was preparing a big surprise for his beloved mother. He went to a shopping center in Culiacan, Sinaloa, to purchase groceries for the celebration. He was accompanied by his cousin Cesar Ariel Lara and his friend Arturo Mesa Cázares, son of Blanca Margarita Cázares, also known as the Empress. Identified by United States authorities as an entity dedicated to money laundering for the Sinaloa Cartel, when the three individuals left the shopping center towards the parking lot, they encountered a thunderous crash and a terrifying scene. A sign on the upper wall of the shopping center, just centimeters from their heads, burst into flames after being hit by a rocket launcher projectile. More than 40 heavily armed individuals, carrying AK-47 rifles and bulletproof vests, exited their vehicles with deadly intent. The three young men tried to escape to their two trucks, one of which was armored, but their efforts were in vain. Without warning, the attackers unleashed a hail of bullets at point-blank range, firing more than 500 rounds at the defenseless victims. When their lives were extinguished, the ruthless criminals quickly fled in their vans, leaving the completely unrecognizable bodies of the three individuals in a pool of their own blood. We'll just say that Edgar's death is more complex than you might think. More information on that will be provided later. In any case, the news of Edgar's death shocked the entire nation. The pain that overwhelmed his father, El Chapo, was so immense that he ordered the purchase of every rose in Culiacan for Edgar's funeral, leaving the sellers without stock. No time to replace the flowers for Mother's Day, but Chapo's grief was too great to consider the needs of others during the funeral. A prominent Mexican artist performed a corrido told from El Chapo's perspective, describing his immense pain. "My son, my source of happiness and sadness. Thank God I will miss you. You are my confidant, my right hand." Edgar's mother, on the other hand, was mired in indignation and spoke to the Mexican media, expressing her frustration at the constant classification of her children as drug traffickers. She was tired of being associated with her husband's dark reputation and wanted to distance herself and her family from that stigma. As for the population of Sinaloa, they also feared possible reprisals and consequences for the death of their son, so they voluntarily decided to establish a curfew, confining themselves within the safety of their homes for days. The question on everyone's mind was, who would dare take the life of the son of a man famous for dissolving his enemies in unforgiving acid, or perhaps someone on a mission carrying out an order he could not refuse. A web of violence was woven from the beginning. Initially, responsibility for Edgar's death was attributed to the Juarez Cartel, and given the fierce ongoing feud between the Juarez and Sinaloa cartels in Culiacan and Navolato, it made some sense. These drug trafficking empires provided a plausible explanation. However, Frida Muñoz Roman, the son's widow, publicly stated that the perpetrators of her husband's murder, which left her young daughter fatherless, were hitmen linked to the Beltran Leyva brothers. Now, you may be wondering who precisely the Beltran Leyva brothers are and why they would seek the death of Chapo's son. The Beltran Leyva brothers, Hector Alfredo and Arturo, were notorious figures in the Mexican underworld. They gained power around the mid-1980s. However, during the subsequent decades, they remained mostly secondary actors in the field of substance trafficking. Arturo Beltran Leyva led the family, and he and his brothers served as hired hitmen for El Chapo, eventually becoming his business associates. When El Chapo was imprisoned in a maximum security prison, the brothers helped ensure that his imprisonment was as harsh as possible, until El Chapo finally managed to escape from prison in 2001. So what changed when one of the brothers, Alfredo, was arrested in early 2008? Arturo accused Chapo of having handed him over. This event marked the official separation between the brothers and Chapo, who left the Sinaloa Cartel to establish their own organization, allying themselves with the Sinaloa Cartel's biggest rivals, including the Zetas. This determination sparked a series of deadly territorial conflicts, and the brothers, especially Arturo, gained notoriety for their grotesque bloodlust. Just a few months later, Edgar was murdered, and many believed it was not simply a coincidence. However, that was one of the two theories. The second hypothesis suggests that the hitmen responsible for Edgar's death were led by none other than one of his father's collaborators. An anonymous shooter from the Sinaloa Cartel told a Mexican newspaper that Edgar's death was a mistake. We know this because, even though mistakes happen, and sometimes are no one's fault, they still need to be paid for. And in this case, only death will cover this mistake. It is presumed that Chapo himself ordered the execution of a young man named Israel Rincon, also known as El Gacho, due to his association with the Beltran brothers. The responsibility of carrying out this operation fell on Gonzalo and his acquaintances, known as El Macho, a main assassin of Ismael El Mayo Zambada, partner and co-founder of the Sinaloa Cartel alongside El Chapo. Communications directives and queries were exchanged via radios, setting the stage for the impending tragedy. Fate also played a cruel hand, as the Macho was present in the same shopping center as Edgar and his friends on that fateful night, at approximately 8:30 at night. Darkness enveloped the city when the three young people left the shopping center. The male mistakenly assumed they were El Gacho and his associates. Without hesitation, he ordered his men to open fire, turning the entire situation into a catastrophic case of mistaken identification. Many people believe this is the most likely possibility, as it was later discovered that the weapon used in the murders closely resembled the one the male preferred. I can't help but wonder about the torment that must have consumed El Chapo upon learning that his beloved son had become the victim of an order he himself had issued. Speaking of Chapo, don't you wonder what he did to avenge his son? Well, technically nothing, and his late response left everyone in suspense. Even a Mexican journalist wrote that the leader of the Sinaloa Cartel seemed to have become compassionate after the death of his son, since there was no retaliation. With everything that is known about El Chapo, do you really think he is the type of man who will just sit back and do nothing? Death reaches everyone, and just a few months after Edgar's death, Arturo Beltran Leyva went into hiding upon learning that authorities in Mexico and the United States were intensifying their efforts to locate him. It wasn't long before they found him. On December 16, 2009, Arturo Beltran Leyva was received by two Mexican sailors, a Navy helicopter and two small Army tanks. In a subsequent shootout that lasted about 4 hours, Arturo was finally shot, and his body was left at the scene, riddled with multiple wounds. Kind of a coincidence, right? Don't wait until you hear what happened to the male. On December 8, 2003, a special group of hundreds of sailors and federal police made their way through the city where the male was suspected of hiding. After finding her home safe, they unleashed a relentless storm of bullets on her. The gunfight lasted for hours, with both sides exchanging heavy fire until the male was finally shot down. Don't you find it strangely similar that the two men were murdered in exactly the same way? I can't help but wonder if these similarities are simply a coincidence, or if they are a sign that Chapo was involved in both cases. After all, we know that El Chapo has many connections that reach the Mexican police. From our point of view, Chapo decided to avenge his son by orchestrating his henchmen without getting his hands dirty. It was his order that sealed the fate of Edgar. It was also his order that sealed the fate of those suspected of having life in their hands. That's all for today. Subscribe if you are really passionate about narco stories. See you next time.